I'd like to, hello everyone. I want to welcome you on behalf of Volunteer Blue and our co-sponsors, Activate America, Blue Future, Commit to Democracy, Demcast, Field Team 6, MA Flip PA, New Yorkers for Democracy, and Third Act. Please put your name and where you're from and how you heard about this event in the chat. And also remember to put your questions for speakers in the chat. We are all working as hard as we can to save American democracy. It's not hyperbole to say that we face the most severe challenge to the Constitution, to our democracy, and to basic decency since the Civil War. How to defeat MAGA is the thing we at Volunteer Blue and all our many partner organizations focus on each and every day. Tonight, however, we want to take some time to look back at the 2024 election, specifically to understand the millions of people who voted for Biden in 2020 and then did not cast a ballot at all in 2024. The story of these Biden skippers, as they're now being called, is one of the most important aspects of the election. And we need to understand who they were, why they did not vote, if we're ever able to reach them and turn them out in the critical midterms in 2026. To help us understand the Biden skippers and their role in 2024 and what we have to do to reach them, we have two brilliant speakers joining us tonight. Unfortunately, our third, Jennifer, will not be able to make it. Celinda Lake, who is going to start us off, is renowned not just for her polling for Democrats. She was one of two lead pollsters for Biden's 2020 campaign, but also for her work for women candidates ranging from Carol Moseley Brown to AOC to Speaker Pelosi. She's also been so often the pollster and critical strategic advisor for organizations like Planned Parenthood, Emily's List, the Human Rights Campaign, and so many more. Lake Research and Way to Win recently set out to understand the Biden skippers, and Celinda will share their research. She'll be followed by Michael Podhorzer, a political analyst many of us have come to rely on. Michael was the longtime political director of the AFL-CIO. He's now board chair for the Analyst Institute and serves on the boards of America's Votes, Catalyst, the Committees on States, and Progressive Majority. So let's start with Celinda. Celinda, the floor is all yours.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I see some familiar faces, and I'm very, very honored to be on with Mike, who is, I think, the most brilliant analyst out there, so just to put it simply, and also with all the people chairing this. And I'm so sorry you're going to miss Jennifer Ancona Fernandez because she is Fernandez Ancona because she is a brilliant analyst and one of the really the authors and the visionary behind this idea. So what we were looking at was the missing Biden voters, people who voted for Biden in 2020 but didn't vote in 2024. And one of my favorite things about polling is when it's myth busting, and this is very much a myth busting survey. So if we look at the first slide, some of the myths was that people in this category forgot to vote, got blocked from voting, just happened not to vote. No, quite the contrary. Both the focus groups and the survey showed that not voting was a very active choice for these folks. And if we look at the next survey and next slide, we see that part of it was rooted in them not liking either candidate and that they were just sick of voting for the lesser of two evils, which was particularly high with younger and more male voters. There was also a sense that my vote wouldn't make any difference in the outcome. And then some Trump's policies were too conservative for me, but a lot of people didn't know what Harris stood for. Harris entered the race at the last minute. Nothing positive was done after 2020. You can see this was a very differentiated judgment that was based on the substance of what was delivered and what did the candidates talk about. If we look at what these voters were worried about, and we look at the next slide, These voters were overwhelmingly worried about rising cost of living. And they were concerned that there was nothing in the Democrats' plan or Harris's plan. And this is not a bash Harris webinar, far from it. What her problems were really speak to the problems of the whole Democratic class, but that she didn't have a strong enough plan to get the cost of living down. And then, contrary to a lot of people's suppositions on the economy, she only focused on home buyers in the middle class, not addressing deeper issues like poverty and inequality. 31% of the voters not mention these issues, and they were very, very strong with, excuse me, I'm just recovering from COVID, very, very strong with Latino voters. You also see some not being democratic enough and not having leadership qualities, which is a key negative often used against women. If we look at the next slide, we see one of the theories is, well, it's better these people didn't show up because they would have voted for Trump and Republican anyway. And the answer is absolutely not. They were overwhelmingly for Harris by 20 points, and they were overwhelmingly Democratic. Excuse me. In their congressional choice. If we look at the next slide. How do we reach these folks? Again, one of the ideas was, well, we didn't do enough of this, we didn't do enough of that, we needed a podcast. Only 5% of these voters were heavy podcast viewers. They are very heavy on social media, particularly YouTube. And they are very heavy on cable news and Facebook and news websites and TikTok. And they are very, very active consumers of news. They are frequently checking the news every day. So it wasn't that they lacked information, and it wasn't that we couldn't have engaged them, but it was the substance. In this case, as we say in our business, sometimes it's the pizza, it's not the box. Or the delivery person in this case. If we look at the next slide, you can see here 75% of them say they follow the news closely. The hypothesis was these were disengaged, low information voters. The Biden skippers were not. They have a lot of information. And in the focus groups, they referred to everything from the French guillotine to the Robespierre. They're very knowledgeable voters, but they didn't. And in fact, having done that kind of searching, they still didn't feel like their lives had changed or they had been offered a real alternative. If we look at the next slide, how do we understand what they want? Well, first of all, what kind of leaders do they like? They love Bernie Sanders. They love AOC. They like Democrats in Congress, believe it or not. They like Gavin Newsom and they like Gretchen Whitmer. They do not like Republicans in Congress, Musk, Trump, or MAGA Republicans. And they particularly hate MAGA Republicans even more than Republicans in general. So again, these are our voters. We have the leaders. What we didn't have, we weren't selling them anything that showed up at their kitchen tables and that made any difference to them or that they believed in would affect their lives. If we look at the next slide, what did they want? They were very clear. They wanted, they were for people, they wanted candidates who would fight for people and fight for all Americans. And they were very, very strongly inclusive. They wanted to fight for everyone. They wanted to fight for all different kinds of people. They're not particularly appealed to by working across the aisle, working with Democrats or Republicans. They don't care about who you work with. They want to care about who you fight for. And they perceive the Democrats, as Jennifer has often said, folding more than fighting right now. That is particularly true, again, among older skippers and Black men, women of color, and Latinas. If we look at the next slide, They like the Democrats and they dislike the Republicans, and they really dislike the MAGA Republicans. So they were very polarized, but they thought the Democrats, they were feeling favorable overall, 67%, but very lukewarm toward them. They wanted to see more from them in terms of fight and more for them in terms of delivery. If we look at the next slide, they would have voted overwhelmingly Democratic for Congress. And if they turn out to vote, they intend to vote overwhelmingly Democrat now, more than 3-1. But they're not convinced that it's worth turning out to vote. And these, again, are many of these people are high propensity Dems. We had 9 million high propensity Dems, not low propensity Dems, but 6 to 9 million high propensity Dems who didn't show up. The margin was enough to win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, the Pennsylvania Senate race, and the Alaska congressional race, just to name a few. If we look at the next slide, they think that Trump is doing a lousy job right now. There's no revisionist history here. They didn't like him to begin with. They didn't support his policies, but they were also not going to vote for the lesser of two evils. If we look at the next slide, what really bothers them? And these are showing intensity on a scale which goes from 0 to 10. And you can see here, these are the means are to the right-hand side. This is the amount of regret that you have for not voting in 2024. The thing that makes them regret the most is cutting programs that help children, disabled veterans, and seniors, including Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Only 20% don't regret that voting for him for that reason. Almost 76%, 77% regret that vote. Doing nothing to lower prices and working families' cost of living, implementing tariffs that will make everyday prices high, eliminating the Department of Education. These Biden skippers are extremely favorable toward education and public school funding. Putting their friends and billionaire allies in positions of power. These are very populist voters. The economic populism and economics and helping those who are too vulnerable to vote for themselves is a huge motivator for these voters. But they don't see us standing up and voting or doing anything. They don't see us fighting to the barricades on these policies. If we look at the next slide, we asked people what kinds of policies would motivate you to vote in the 2026 elections. Getting affordable and secure health insurance for those who need it. Healthcare is their number one issue. It is our best issue as Democrats, and we are massively, massively under talking about it. And there are so many aspects of it: prescription drug prices, surprise billing, the ACA not being affordable. People are wildly in favor of Medicare for all. People are wildly in favor of universal coverage. They are in favor of all kinds of proposals in terms of affordability. Strengthening enforcement against wealthy tax cheats and making the wealthy pay what they owe. Keeping taxes for working families, what they can afford. Eliminating junk fees and stopping price gouging. Making it easier for people to afford housing. You can see we don't need to look for an affordability agenda. We have an affordability agenda, but people don't see us delivering on it, and people don't see us fighting for it. And that the Biden skippers are very adamantly in favor of the affordability agenda. If we look at the next slide, how do we summarize this in terms of overall messages? And the first thing is, these are very populist voters. We offered them the alternative, having an economic system where the richest 1% take 50 trillion in wealth from 90% of Americans over the past few decades through tax cuts, privatized healthcare, squashing unions, and dividing us by our differences, or out of control government spending, too many immigrants, going too far with wokeness and DEI and rights for transgender people by 72% to 20%. These Biden skippers said it's the economic system right now where the wealthiest 1% are taking everything. And notice this is very populist hot language and supported overwhelmingly by these voters. You will notice in all of the lists of policies that I gave you, I didn't mention immigration. Immigration is not a hot issue for these voters. If anything, they think cutting some of the programs and the way people are being treated has been going too far. And yes, people can get all of these slides and more. At the end, we can send them around. Let's look at the next statement. And when we ask people, what do you want? Do you want Democrats to fight back against Trump and his actions? Or do you want Democrats to work to find common ground? These people do want policies passed, but they think fighting is the way to get them. And by 19 points, they think fighting 56 to 37 is the way to get them. That is particularly true among seniors and the youngest people, and it is true for both men and women, and very true for people of color. And finally, what are our strongest messages? If we look at the next slide, we took these messages into language, and that slide isn't showing up right. It's performing. We'll figure out what's wrong with the margins, but let me read you our strongest testing message. The American people need a Democratic Party that stands strong and pushes back against the Trump administration. The president and his rich friends care more about giving tax breaks to the wealthy than making cost of living for the things we buy go down and helping American workers. Democrats need to be the ones to unite the American people, regardless of race, class, or zip code, against this hostile government takeover and demand representation for all of us, not just the 20%. That is our top testing message. And our second best message, and this is Jenna Ancona's hypothesis, and it was a brilliant one. We never really gave the voters a transition or explanation message on COVID. And these Biden skippers really responded to that message. The COVID crisis revealed imbalances in the American economy that haven't even started to be addressed. We saw the rich get richer while essential workers were forced to risk their lives. Supply chain issues led to global inflation, which was worsened by corporate price gouging, and Americans who were already struggling financially couldn't afford the basics. Everything Trump is doing is just making it worse. We can't move forward as a country until we have leaders who will confront these big problems. By the way, the weakest testing message talks about finding common ground and talks about abundance and blamed the left. All of those messages were very, very weak. The last slide I'll show you shows you the strength of those messages, and you can see here real intensity. We think a message is good when it gets 40% dark green and 60% overall. These are testing at 80%, and the intensity is 40 to 53%, very intense. Again, common ground and abundance not testing very well. Abundance attacking the left for regulations. So what are the lessons here? These voters, if we look at the next slide, these voters are winnable. They cannot be taken for granted or dismissed, or they won't turn out again. We have very strong narratives, but we're not issuing them. We have very strong villains, but we're not accusing them. We have very strong heroes, but we're not using them. And we have a very strong populist economic tone that works very well, and we're not issuing it, or we're issuing it only about half of the time and then pulling back all of the time. We must invest in more platforms, and I'm not the expert here, but others on the call are. There is a huge array of mediums to face these people, to reach these people. They are very engaged, but they are very fractured in their engagement. And finally, we need to establish a dominant narrative now, not try to establish it 2 months before the election in 2026. There is going to be $12 billion spent in advertising, and I'm not even arguing for advertising, but $12 billion spent in 2026. think of it if we spent even a quarter of that money on the narratives that work in this data. So, on that note, let me end. Glad to take your questions later and eager to turn it over to my colleague, Mike.
Thank you so much, Celinda. So we're going to hear from Mike Podhorzer, and then we're going to take questions. So please put your questions in the chat, and we'll try and compile them and make sure that both Celinda and Michael get a chance to answer them. So, Michael, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Great, thanks. I really appreciate the chance to do this and to see so many people who, in spite of what's going on, are so energized to get out and do something about it. And I really think Celinda covered a lot of the really important points about sort of how to conceptualize them, but I want to add a few things. I think probably if you are like many of the people I see in Zooms like this, you decided to get really involved in politics either after Trump won the first time or in 2020 or after that because of your commitment to your values and the danger you saw Trump posing. And in a way, that's actually a way to understand the many of the voters that Celinda was talking about because most of them did not vote in 2016. These are people, by and large, who have been alienated from the political process altogether. Now, you all were probably voting before that, but not being as active. These are people who were sort of brought off the sidelines entirely by their sense of what that was at stake because of Trump. And not in any way really by the appeal of what either Democrats generally or Biden or Harris in particular was offering, right? These are people, by definition, who had not really thought that the political process was going to be able to change their lives for the better. And it's not difficult to understand why for most people in this country, especially since the crash in 2008, life has gotten more and more precarious, and politicians have properly be seen, and so have institutions, as being less and less in touch with their actual daily lives, their concerns, or let alone being able to offer them something that would make their life actually better every day. But what does motivate people is what's called loss aversion or fear of loss and like that you have something at stake. And so what we saw after 2016 when Trump got into office was that in the next midterm in 2018, that blue wave, turnout went up by about twice the highest bump it's had in American history to the highest level it's ever been in American history, because on both sides, suddenly everybody understood this wasn't two ineffectual choices, but depending on your perspective, a really bad choice out there. And so Democrats were able to sweep on that. But by 2020, the level of people voting was still high. It was like, again, sort of the highest level of turnout for a presidential election since women, the 19th Amendment, women could vote. So more and more people are engaged. But in spite of that, even in 2020, many of the people who had started to get activated didn't show up, which is why, if you remember, the race was closer. It was still a clear victory, but it was closer than the polls had it before then. Well, after that, right, remember that Biden came in, the Democrats came in saying that this was a battle for the soul of the nation, that it was an existential crisis, that it was the biggest crisis the country had faced since the Civil War. And especially after January 6th, really reinforced that. They basically like were unable to do anything to hold Trump to account. I mean, it or to make people's lives much better in any meaningful way. And and so, as you saw by 2022 and 23 with inflation and other problems, many of those people who had been motivated because of their concerns about Trump were just basically giving up on the political process again. And that set the stage for what happened in 2024, where um, you know, by and large, the difference between how well Biden did and how well Harris did against Trump was the fewer number of votes that Harris got, as opposed to Trump getting many more votes. He barely got more votes than he did 4 years ago. Not that many more people are supporting him than 4 years ago, but a lot of people just were disappointed by the those 4 years. And this is both an international phenomenon in the last decade and here in the United States as well. In the last 10 elections, nine of them voters have thrown out the party in power, right? That has never come close to happening in American history before. The sequence we've had of Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. Hasn't happened in more than a century. The closeness and intensity of the race, it's all new, but it's not because people are jazzed about what they have to vote for. It's because of the sense of what they have to lose if they don't. And so I think it's really important to take the advice that Celinda was offering about who they are, what will motivate them, how to talk about what's happening right now, and give them the confidence again that if they go and vote in 2026, their vote will make a really important difference. So thanks.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to bring in Michelle Olson and Rena Schnur from the Volunteer Blue Team to open up the questions. Again, put your questions in the chat and we'll do our best to cover as many of them as we can. Michelle?
Hi, thank you. And thanks to both Mike and Celinda. Your comments were very insightful, especially about the Biden skippers. I think it's really important for everybody on this call to recognize that as a demographic, our top issues and perspectives are just very different from most voters out there, and especially the Biden skippers. And it's important for us to understand those differences. So thank you. So we do have time for a few questions. I'll start off with one, and then Rena, my colleague at Volunteer Blue, she'll follow up with actually some questions that have gone in the chat from the audience. So for my question, it can go to either Celinda or Mike, I'd like to address the question of the causes of the decline in support, especially among key demographic groups. In the 2024 presidential election, we saw that the steepest slippage in Democratic support was among Black, Latino, and voters under 30, especially men. In fact, the only group to stay steady was actually white women.
Well,
so if
not true. Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
It's really important. It doesn't get covered, but it's really crucial at this moment that union members actually increased their support for Harris by 2 points over Biden to nearly 60 points, 60%. And that's really crucial for people who are not close to the labor movement to understand, because right now Trump is trying to wipe them out. And as much as going after the media or law firms or universities or so on, or the judges is part of the standard authoritarian playbook, so is going after unions. And I think it's really important for people on the Zoom, people everywhere, to understand that when they do hear about those kinds of attacks, that they are not merely sympathetic, as I'm sure everyone is, but recognize, that quote, Niemöller during the rise of the Nazis, the second group, he said, when first they came for, the second group was unions. And the success in pushing back against attacks on unions is one of the essential bulwarks against Trump's long-term success.
Very interesting.
Sorry, I
Um,
didn't mean to
But in terms of these so I'm particularly interested in the change in the support among Blacks and Latinos. I looked at the numbers, and just if Harris could have maintained the same level of support that Joe Biden had received just among Blacks and Latinos, she would have handily won. She had a decline of about 6 million voters, and Trump only won by 2+ million voters. And this erosion of support does seem to be continuing. Voter registration is at a historic low for Democrats, and their approval rating numbers just decline. And that probably has a lot to do with this fight that they're not able to fight as strongly as people would like. There's a question of what they can do to fight, but that's a separate question. But really focusing in on these demographics, since the impact of a poor economy is broadly felt by everybody, regardless of your demographic. Do you have any information or insights explaining the huge relative decline of support in these core constituencies, that is Blacks, Latinos, youth, and especially men, and how the party should address it? That's my question.
Mike, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I think that the demographic groups that you just named are also the ones that have seen their approval of Trump sink the most since the election, because we were done a great disservice in the way the media characterized that change in support as being moving towards Trump rather than being moving away from Democrats. And if you like, as a sort of vivid example of how, like, of all of the dynamics wrapped up in that, Kamala Harris received 600,000 fewer votes in Los Angeles than Joe Biden did. Do you think if the election were held today, the 600,000 people who had voted for Biden, who stayed home last November, are cool with the invasion that's taken place in the city, masked ICE folks, right, roaming the streets and grabbing people? No, of course not. And of course, the 600,000 people who stayed home were disproportionately Latino, Black, and young, right? That it is a complete circle there. And it gets to what I was saying about the failure in 2024 to credibly convey what was actually at stake, because it's just impossible to believe that those 600,000 or the hundreds of thousands in Chicago or Washington, D.C. or New York or in battleground states in Philadelphia or Milwaukee would have stayed home if they actually believed this is what was coming. Go ahead.
Yeah, I would just add, and I think Mike laid it out very clearly. First of all, number one, those numbers about the decline, and I'm not underestimating him. And in fact, the group that I didn't get to in the Biden skippers that is disaffected is Latinos, particularly Latino men. So I'm not underestimating that. But I would say two things. We could have won the election if we'd gotten the people that defected to come home. We could have won the election if we had gotten the people who decided, the Biden skippers, out to vote. Also, and I don't mean to get overly complicated about math, but let's say there are 200,000 African Americans, men, who go for Trump, that didn't go for Trump before. But you only have 1 million instead of 1.5 million African Americans show up. That looks like a greater defection. 200,000 out of 1 million is a higher number than 200,000 out of 1.5 million. So we need to understand that there are two sets of problems here. And in fact, frankly, one of the easier problem is to solve the Biden skippers than to solve the defectors, but we're not solving either one right now. I would say there are three things we need to do, and it's pretty clear, in my opinion, but our party's seriously divided on this question. First of all, what is the Democratic economic plan? Can anyone here name it? What are the three first economic bills we're going to introduce when we take back Congress? I can't name them, and I poll on it every day. If you don't have an economic reason to vote for a Democrat, you're not going to vote for a Democrat if you're blue collar in a bad economy. Secondly, you can't beat something with nothing. And we are severely divided about whether we should be offering an alternative or whether we should lie down and let them kill themselves. Well, we tried that in 2024 and it didn't work. And it won't work in 2026, in my opinion. And finally, we have to offer change. We didn't offer change. We offered the status quo, and voters were done with the status quo, both the ones who defected and the ones who decided to sit home. And you can hear, I am in rooms every day where people say, well, they got nowhere to go. Yeah, they do. The couch. Yeah, they do have somewhere to go. And they already showed us that if we don't deliver and we don't produce change with new leadership, new policies, then we're not going to elect people. So everybody's so excited about 2026, not unless we get an economic platform out there, not unless we fight for change, and not unless we offer something to beat something, because we can't beat something with nothing.
Thank you. So just to follow up, clearly economics was at the heart of so many of these decisions. In addressing the disconnect between Black and Latino voters versus white voters, is it that Black and Latino voters felt the economic impact disproportionately to white voters? Or why was so white vote was pretty steady from 2020 to 2024. There was a slight decline in white men. White women actually increased. So there was a huge decline in Black and Latino. Do you have any explanation other than that they felt the economic, or that Kamala Harris wasn't going to be fighting enough, or I'm just trying to understand that particular demographic.
Hear you. Here's the problem with the analysis. It's what the base is. It's just like I said, if you have 200,000 defecting African Americans and you only get 1 million African Americans out, it looks like a fifth of your vote defected. If you get 1.5 million, it looks like a seventh of your vote defected. Whites, frankly, had already declined so far. And it depends on the data set you're looking at, but some groups of white men declined pretty rapidly. We held college educated. We didn't hold non-college educated. So, but really when you're starting with our vote had already declined to 2/3 for Trump, there's only so much further you can decline. So I don't think they felt it anymore. I think we failed across the board. And I think some of the work that one of, I think Mike's and my favorite analysts, Anat Shanker, who many of you know, who's done the race class narrative, this combination of race and class, white poor people have a lot in common with African American and Latino poor people, but race trumps class right now. And we let it trump class. And that's on us, honestly. We have a responsibility, I have a responsibility as a white woman to be doing something about this. And particularly to white non-college women, and to get more in touch with their lives and understand it's not trivial we shouldn't be making jokes about being worried about the price of eggs. When you don't even have $500 in savings, the price of eggs matters.
So I want to follow up with some numerical questions from the chat. So some people want.
Okay, Mike gets to take all those.
No, actually, Celinda, some are yours. How many of those? So we are talking about the subset of the people that didn't vote, which did vote for Biden in 2020, but didn't vote. So a few questions about those. Didn't go to vote at all, or they just did not vote for the top of the ticket?
Most of them didn't go to vote at all.
Okay, and B, how many total are there? and
Well,
how
Mike,
many
I'd
were
love
in the
your-
battleground states?
Yeah, I'd love your answer on this because the numbers I've seen are like a variety of numbers. But some people have calculated as high as 9 million. We have calculated the high propensity drop-off voters. This is high propensity, not low propensity. High propensity Democratic voters who did not vote in 2024. And there were enough to win Pennsylvania and the Senate race, enough to win Michigan, enough to win Wisconsin, enough to win Arizona, and enough to win the Alaska congressional race. But in terms of the total, Mike, I don't know. I used to have a number, but now I'm leery of giving.
Yeah,
it to some of
I
the people
think
who have
it's
challenged.
probably around 15 or 16 million or so.
Of the Biden
Yeah,
skipper.
Biden, yeah.
That's a substantial amount. And another question, Celinda, this is for you and about the sample size. What was the sample size of that led to the conclusion?
Oh, these were surveys of 1,000 people. And these findings, this particular finding has been replicated in lots of others. And then the drop-off analysis was done by, analyzing actual voting results, voter file results.
Okay, great. Another follow-up question from the chat. We are heading into the battle for the budget. Would any of those conclusion or insight from these specific Biden skippers lead to a particular way to approach for the Democrats to approach this battle?
Well, I would love Mike to jump in here too, but
You should take that, yeah.
in terms of the budget, a couple of things. First of all, don't fight numbers. Okay. Americans terrible at math. When you express numbers, people think that, they get really confused and they think there is more money that can be cut. Don't fight cutting programs. Even though that's what we expressed, you should be talking about taking away food from children, kindergartners. You should be talking about taking away, terminating people's health care. Paint a picture of who is being harmed here. People being thrown out of nursing homes, rural hospitals closing, etc. So paint a picture of the victims here. And then draw the line for people. Don't let them get out from underneath it. And when they say the narrative of waste, fraud, and abuse, it's not even that strong a narrative, frankly. People do think these programs could be cut, but you should take it on and say, this isn't cutting. This is taking away healthcare from people. This is taking away Medicare from people and Medicaid from people, and nursing home care. And you should say that, give an example in, your neighborhood or your state or your congressional district. And again, don't rely on numbers, rely on painting real pictures of real people and disabled people in wheelchairs and holding vigils with the people that have been affected and veterans. And even when you're talking about federal employees, talk about what those federal employees do. Talk about who they serve. These are people who fight child abuse. These are people who make sure that your grandmother gets her Social Security check. These are people who enforce regulations against predatory loans that can have interest rates up to 425%. That's usury. Even the U.S. Army banned these predatory lenders because they said it was usury. So paint vivid pictures of what is being affected. Don't do numbers. Don't say funding. Budgets are shitty vehicles, frankly, for having debates. And so we need to pick a couple of aspects and really drive those home. And the good news is they're so absolute in their cuts and their approach that they won't get out from underneath us picking these specifics. Mike, I think there were a couple of questions in the chat too that were talking about the numbers and stuff that you may be better able to address than I am, that were questioning the validity of some of the numbers we were giving. If you want to address them.
What are they?
Or maybe Michelle or Rena, you can read them.
Yeah, as we go to this, just to follow up, so this particular demographics of voters said though that they want the Democratic Party to fight. So
Yeah.
would agreeing to the budget would be perceived as non-fighting necessarily, or regardless of the consequences of shutdown and so on?
I mean, yeah. I think so. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, we
And-
need to take some strong stands. We need to take some strong stands. And I think the other thing we need to do is we need to think of more dramatic, bold action. And again, budgets are not the perfect vehicle for this. But one of my favorite examples is the VA negotiates 399 drug prices. They are on average 32 to 50% cheaper than Medicare. Medicare was only negotiating 10 to 20, and the Trump administration's taken that away. Well, hello, if you can't figure out how to get prescription drug prices, let's just have every Democrat tear out the page of the price list from the VA manual and march it over to the US Senate and the US House. Because if you can't figure it out, we can't adopt the VA price list today for Medicare. What's stopping you? You know what's stopping you? Farmer contributions. You know why they're stopping it? Because they really bought both parties.
Addressing another question that we're seeing a few of in the chat. Do you have any insights on why Democrats in Congress did fold and vote for the big, beautiful bill? It did require some Democratic support in order to pass.
No, it didn't.
And yeah, go ahead.
No, it was budget reconciliation. It was completely a party line vote. No Democrats voted for it. Or were
Wasn't there a 60 vote requirement to
No,
get it?
that's the whole point.
Yeah.
It was done through reconciliation where you
Yeah.
only need, in this case, 50 votes. They couldn't even keep all of their senators, and Vance had to cast the deciding vote. But at least with respect to that, there were no Democratic votes whatsoever, either in the House or the Senate, and they weren't needed.
So if
But
we
Michelle, your question is a good one, because I think a lot of people are confused about this. This is why budgets are terrible vehicles for arguing from.
point. Good point. So if we look at the ahead, and a lot of us here are grassroots volunteers that trying to do all we can and take action every day that make impact. So, and I want also to reiterate, Mike, something I've heard a few times from you, not just tonight, that the fact that these voters have 3 choices, not 2. So it's not a binary choice like we always say, but they're the third choice,
Right.
to vote to stay home or to vote for another a third party candidate that leads to nowhere, which in my mind, in turn, you really give Trump the half of your vote. So
Sure.
don't know how that resonates. So these voters, in a way, we always debate about persuasion versus GOTV, but really we need to persuade them, or we needed to, and we still need to persuade them to GOTV to
Exactly.
get out the vote. So how do we do that? Let's say you two are in charge of devising a plan where we reach them, and it was interesting to hear that a lot of them did tune to CNN, MSNBC, and the usual channels that we all watch. But how do we reach them now? Some of them didn't. Where and how, and what kind of message we tell them to bring them into the fold as voters, but maybe even as people that take action with us.
Yeah. So I hate to do this to you, Sonda, but I actually have to jump.
Oh, sorry.
So I will leave this in your capable hands.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Do you want to leave any last message on any
No,
topic?
it's just great. I really am so appreciative of all the work you do and all the folks who are on this. We all have to do this to get through this.
Thank you,
you.
Mike. Thanks for being an oracle for sure for us
Yeah.
and our movement. Well, let me start back. I want to start back on the shutdown for just a second as a partial answer to the broader question that you raised, Rena. First of all, we can't shut down just to shut down. We can't shut down just to seem partisan. You know, we're going to shut down because they're not going to get anything passed. We need to shut down for a reason. We need to say something or do something and screw process respectfully, and pardon my French, but we need to say something like, you guarantee us you will fund Medicaid, fund these nursing homes, fund these rural hospitals, reinstate this healthcare that you are taking away from people, restore the funding for school lunches and school breakfast, or we're going to shut it down. We're going to shut it down until you stop balancing the budget and do nothing to your military industrial complex. You do nothing to your donors. You pass a new tax break. Don't call it a new tax break for the wealthiest 1%. And until you stop this, we're going to shut it down. So be sure you don't just shut it down to shut it down. And that may not even be the best argument. I'm just giving it as an example that voters will assume we're playing politics unless we shut it down for a reason. We stand up for people. We take a side. We fight for something and for someone. So that's point number one. Point number two is you're absolutely right that both mobilization and voting our way require persuasion now. It's mobsuasion is what Anat calls mobilization now. The good news is, honestly, a lot of the same messages work for both. There are some nuances of differences, but not a lot. And so we need to just get out these things no matter what, in terms of whether we're persuading. And then we start all these efforts, you know, May of next year, we start October, we run into I've been on the bus trips, I've been to the doors in Philadelphia. I'm stunned that voters don't pour boiling oil on us, to be honest with you, because we're knocking on their doors, show up to vote. They say, I already told the last 5 people who came, I'm voting. We deliver nothing. We go into an area that's been a food desert for 20 years, and we don't exercise our crowd to get a grocery store in there. And then we say, knock, hope you can vote. I think they should pour boiling oil on us, honestly, at this point. So we need to deliver. We need to fight for someone, and we need to deliver. And I think we have a golden opportunity because we have all of these local races, all of these statewide races. We have 36 governor races, 30 AG races, and people are in love with their AGs right now. Let's get some common messaging. Let's fight at the state and local level. I think there's only so much that's going to change federally. Let's get our message going at the state and local level, where we probably can have more influence. And let's get on the local news, which, by the way, beat national cable. And let's get our message out at the state and local level so that we elect some governors who have promised to restore Medicaid. So who say, I'm really not worried about the fraud of a little kid getting 2 school lunches, okay? That's not my big issue here with BlackRock and Hell stealing us blind in Iraq.
Okay, and stay tuned because we will, in a minute, follow up to what Celinda said about actions, so we can all take even today. Any last?
One thing I saw in your comments, registration is really, really, really important. Really, really, really important. And here's why it's important. You've got a quarter to a third of young people who are not where they were in 2024 by 2020. So we got to get them registered for 26 and registered again. And then these voters who didn't vote in 24, they're high movers too. So we've got a huge number of our vote that is registered in the wrong location right now. And they are confused, and they are not particularly motivated to get registered again. They're not like saying, oh man, I gotta go register. Because they already said, I don't even care about voting. So we have really got to engage in registration efforts. And we got to go where people are at, not ask them to come where we're at.
And we have fallen behind in terms of registration rates.
That's right. That's exactly right. You all
Right,
saw the
right.
new studies that
Thank
came out.
So one question that was asked a couple of times in the audience was, in terms of more things of what people can do to as volunteers. Some people asked whether postcard writers could actually write to Biden skippers in particular, or possibly, as you were mentioning, to people who need to re-register, young people who need to re-register. Is that a particular, are those things viable options? Are there ways to get those demographic groups?
Yeah. So one thing I want to comment on, I'm sorry, I'm sure there are many more good comments, but I just love the expression I saw come through the chat, which is, what are we going to do to deserve these voters? And I love that expression. And that is a challenge to all of us and a challenge to our leaders. So I love that expression, Lindsay. So first of all, writing postcards, believe it or not, has proven to be one of the most effective mechanisms. It's hard to break through the din, and written postcards are very effective. They are effective, however, to older voters, not to younger voters who do not process snail mail very much. But remember when I went past it so fast, and by the way, I saw all of you can get all of these slides, and Rena or Michelle or Mike will distribute them. Remember I had a bimodal distribution of who's easiest to get right now? The under 30s and the over 65s. Those over 65s really, really, really reliant, really like postcards. So yeah, you can go get those postcard people, write postcards. It makes a big difference. You need to send social media. You need to make sure your social media is on YouTube, because YouTube is soaring as a source. You need to give out a voting record. People are getting away with murder here. We follow actively on this call the news. I would say half of us on this call, myself included, confused about what budget votes happened, what were the numbers, who voted how. I mean, when I know the numbers, and yet when I was seeing some of you scroll through and say, well, we lost these votes, I'm thinking, shit, did we lose those votes? I thought we had a party. You know, it's confusing. And then most people don't have the reliable information that we have. A third of people get their information from friends and family. We got to get some people some new friends. We got to befriend our Facebook. We got to befriend our book group, our church group, our Girl Scout, our mom's listserv, whatever. And not send them, really radical hot emails, which is what we would all tend to do. But send them information. Here's the voting record. Your representative who wouldn't show up for that town hall. Here's how he voted. But you don't have to believe me. Here's the record in the congressional record. You should go check it. Let's make it easy for people to get information, because it's not easy right now. And people are getting tons of misinformation. Sorry.
Ooh.
Great. Thank you, Celinda, very much. This is so insightful. And I think leading exactly what you said, that we need to take action. We also need to think about what you said and how this insight guides us, because no insight, as I know, and I'm kind of coming from the analytics area, no insight is good if we don't take action or guide our decisions and actions by it. So we need to do that. We all need to think. So first thing you can all do is make a new friend. Go find a Biden skipper and make a new friend. But beyond that, you're going to see in the chat now a link to a document that has a list of all of our partners and a lot of actions that you can take today. You will find their voter registration that Celinda mentioned, that's so critical and will be critical all the way to 26 and beyond. There are elections coming up in November, in 8 weeks. Governors, you mentioned that, particularly Virginia and New Jersey, there are phone banks, postcarding, also Prop 50 in California that will determine if redistricting will pass, and we will have I would say, a fair chance in 2026. So that's critical. But beyond that, you can see we have a whole project that deals with red districts, which are districts governed today by Republican House members, but are flippable. And we want to engage with them. I'm sure the Biden skippers in those districts are critical, and they will come into the fold. So we have been engaging with some already, and you can sign up to be active in this project and work in those districts. And of course, there are some districts that already do deep canvassing to engage with these voters. So there are lots of training. There is Org 101 coming up in a few days by Activate America. Commit to Democracy will teach you about how to write letters to the editors. And Field Team 6 will have actions about registration. That's all their focus. And also about social media, how to post and maybe bring people, make new friends on social media as well. So please look at the chat. We will share the slides, the recording, and this particular link with the actions, and all of our partners who have been doing great work in terms of getting actions that are impactful and also that you can enjoy and find communities.
Rena, may I say one more thing? I want to
course.
thank everybody because it's already a great commitment of time, and time is so precious right now. It's also hard to be motivated. I mean, I live in an armed, occupied city, and it's horrifying, honestly. And I feel bad for the National Guard. This is not what they signed up for. I do not feel bad for the ICE agents, but we got both. But I also want to thank Way to Win, because I want to make sure that you all understand this was a tremendous investment on their part. They have visionary research that they're doing. They also link to social media programs. And because Jennifer couldn't be here, I really want to acknowledge, I wouldn't have had anything to say if it hadn't been for their vision and their tremendous research. So I want to thank them and thank you all as well.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Rena. Thank you, Michelle.
Good night.
And by the way, when you send it out, people can send it to other people too. It doesn't matter. The presentation's fully public.
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'll close it down.
Thank you so much. Thanks
you.
for the help on the slides too.